G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. We're about to get some ABC radio news coverage, talking to a sort of a bushfireologist.
To politicise this bushfire crisis, but the fires have nevertheless found their way into a number of distinctly political arguments today, whether that's which ministers are on holidays, the influence of climate change, or the dilemma of whether or not to cancel fireworks displays, particularly in Sydney. Here's political reporter Tom Eagledon.
As stranded townsfolk and holidaymakers watch homes go up in smoke from the beaches of the New South Wales south coast, Sydney-siders will gather on the harbour foreshore tonight to watch the annual fireworks display. Lord Mayor Clover Moore is unapologetic.
It then generates $130 million for the state's economy, powers our tourism industry.
Messages describing how to donate to fire relief appeals will, she says, be projected onto the harbour bridge during the event, but that's doing little to counter criticism that the display is insensitive at best. Federal opposition leader Anthony Albanese is among those uncomfortable with the decision to go ahead.
I understand how important the fireworks are for our economy, but I think that it's really problematic that it's going ahead.
Perhaps feeling on the defensive, Clover Moore says it's not the fireworks that are the problem here as the bushfire emergency worsens.
What is happening is a wake-up call for our governments to start making effective contributions to reducing global emissions.
And she took a shot at the Federal Emissions Reduction Minister Angus Taylor, who writes in the Australian newspaper today that Australians shouldn't be embarrassed by the government's efforts in that area.
I think Angus Taylor should be ashamed of this inaction as a minister who's a minister responsible for addressing global warming at the scale.
When reporters invited Anthony Albanese to offer a view on that, this was his response.
Now's not the time to answer questions like that when we're talking about a national emergency and a national crisis.
Instead, he confined his comments to condolences to Samuel McPaul, the 28-year-old volunteer firefighter and father-to-be who lost his life last night in a freak weather event.
Every loss of life is one too many, and we've seen far too many during this bushfire crisis.
Prime Minister Scott Morrison offered up a video on his Facebook page, also paying tribute to Samuel McPaul.
I spoke to Meg and his wife this morning and extended mine and Jenny's deepest sympathies and condolences for her terrible loss.
Mr Morrison didn't take questions from reporters today.
The nature of the challenge is great, and so in the days and weeks and I fear months ahead, it will continue to be difficult. I wish we had better news on New Year's Eve. But one news we can always take comfort in is the amazing spirit of Australians.
And he said he'd make available any resources needed of the Australian Defence Force to Victorian and New South Wales firefighting brigades.
All governments are working together because this is really a common threat and a shared task.
That's Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews, who says he's looking at ways of taking the Prime Minister up on his offer, potentially including having the Navy evacuate people from the Victorian fishing village of Malakuta, ringed by fire and cut off by road.
We've made some requests to the ADF for their support, both in terms of making damage assessments, but also some of these isolated communities can be accessed by sea.
As the crisis deepened last night, the Premier returned from holidays with his family at his regular haunt on the Mornington Peninsula.
These are an hour away from Melbourne, and I think that has always served us well. These are really significant events. People have lost their homes. We may well be talking about lives lost. So the best place for me is to be here.
But in New South Wales, Emergency Services Minister David Elliott remains overseas on his family holiday. His office didn't respond to several requests from PM about whether he'd return, as promised, if the situation worsened. Instead, New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian's being asked to explain his absence.
That Premier, the Emergency Services Minister said we have to deteriorate pretty badly for him to come back. How much worse is it going to be?
Look, this is about making sure we have the people in place, the resources in place to take care of the situation, and we have that. At the end of the day, the buck stops with me. I'm the Premier.
The New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian ending Tom Eagledon's report. You've heard a few times already this fire season about fires so big that they have their own weather system. These systems are sometimes called firestorms, pyroclouds, or a pyrocumulonimbus. Firestorms have been making already treacherous firegrounds even more unpredictable this season. RFS District Manager Superintendent Patrick Westwood described the freak conditions that killed 28-year-old volunteer Samuel McPaul at Jingellic near Albury yesterday.
Very suddenly, they experienced extreme winds and what could only be described as a fire tornado that lifted the back of the truck, fully inverted it, and landed it on its roof, trapping 3 people our 3 crew that is, and unfortunately one of them fatally.
To better understand the phenomenon of a firestorm, I spoke to Dr. Rachel Badlin, a specialist in atmospheric dynamics from the University of New South Wales. What exactly do we mean when we talk about a firestorm?
There's a lot of confusion around this term, I think. So what I mean, what scientists mean, is a thunderstorm that's actually generated by a bushfire, which is not just a cloud. A lot of people are saying that this pyrocumulus are firestorms. They're not. They're just clouds. But if they get big enough and have like an anvil shape, and we all know what a thunderstorm looks like, if it generates one of those, that's a fire thunderstorm.
So how rare are firestorms in the way that you've defined them? Like, we have heard about them in years gone by, but we do seem to be hearing about them a lot more frequently now, and particularly during this fire season. Is that the case?
We've actually got a register of firestorms or fire thunderstorms in Australia. And up till last year, the end of 2018, we had from 2000 to 2018 about 46 in Australia, registered, confirmed ones. In 6 weeks at the beginning of this year, we had 18, mainly in the high country, in Victoria. And in the last month, we've had probably around 15, up to 15 confirmed. So we've had 30 in a year.
Let's talk about what characterises a firestorm beyond that cloud that you described earlier, that pyrocumulonimbus. What kind of effects do they produce? How are they different from a regular thunderstorm, for example?
What they do is they generate lightning, just like a normal thunderstorm, but instead of the rain, think of embers instead. So they actually are a very efficient way of sucking embers in, if you like, up the convective column, and then throwing them out in erratic directions, and that's the problem. It's the strong winds that are created that cause these problems for firefighters, and that's why we recommend evacuation, if possible, if there's a pyro-CV, because you can't fight those fires.
Why is it that the firestorms you're describing are impossible to fight, as you say?
Because once the fire starts interacting with the atmosphere, which is what happens in this point, the only way it can turn off is maybe overnight. The stability in the atmosphere will actually bring it back down, and then you can try and attack it, or you can wait for the fire to go out. But once the actual fire has generated the thunderstorm, there's nothing you can do.
And they're quite unpredictable as well, aren't they? That's another feature.
Yes, so that's the problem. Once the thunderstorm starts forming, you get these very strong downbursts, and they bring hot, dry air from above down to the surface, and they can come at you from any direction. That's part of the problem. And they can also generate fire tornadoes. But these are quite different from something called a fire whirl, so we can talk about that as well if you like, because that seems to be what happens at Jingellic with the fire truck. There's a possibility it was a fire whirl that probably flipped the truck.
Yeah, so what's a fire whirl? What's the difference, and what makes you think that's what happened at Jingellic?
Well, in Jingellic, we think there was a pyro-CV. We can't confirm that. But without any observational data, we can't say which one it was. But fire whirls are much more common, I guess. It's probably why we would think that. That's not to downgrade this. This is just as devastating a phenomenon, but they're generated just from the heat of the bushfire.
How big does a fire need to be before it triggers a firestorm, in your experience?
That's the ongoing work that we've just done. And we find that it's not so much the size, it's the intensity, so how hot the fire is. And also, so that would be fuel. So if you think of it in a mountain, like an alpine park or something, you've got a lot of heavy fuel there. So that's the sort of fuel that's needed, I guess, for a lot of pyro-CVs. But it's also the shape. And we've found out that the, I guess, more circular or regular a shape, the more likely it is to generate. Whereas these skinny fires, much less likely to. I mean, it's quite common sense, but it's something that we had to prove scientifically in order to justify our prediction.
Is it fair to say that firestorms are a phenomenon that we fully understand yet, or is it still an emerging area of science?
Oh, it's very much active. We are constrained, I guess, in Australia by lack of funding, because one really good way of doing it is to look at LiDAR. It's like a radar. You point it at a pyro-CV, and you can get a much better idea of the structure of the fire thunderstorm. Unfortunately, we only have one in Australia, and it's very hard to to get it to the fire on the given day, but we are making a lot of inroads in the prediction of the conditions that lead to them, and that's the important thing.
Will there be more urgency in research in this area now that we've had the season that we've had, do you think?
I'd like to think so. Again, you know, not being political, it comes down to funding, and science is constrained at the moment.
It's self-evident in some ways, but just to spell it out, what is the value of understanding firestorms better to volunteers and firefighters working on the ground?
If you, on a given day, say, for example, have 20 fires burning, you want to know which one of those is going to blow up and create a fire thunderstorm, because that's the one you can't do anything about. So you need to move your people away from harm and residents and deploy them where they can be useful. So the most value of all this research is really to be able to save a life, save money, and, you know, not put firefighters in dangerous situations.
That was Dr. Rachel Badlin, a postdoctoral research fellow from the University of New South Wales. Over the New Year period, tens of thousands of Australians will head to music festivals around the country, often in rural areas. Health experts are warning that this year's combination of heat, bushfires and illicit drug use poses a significant risk to their safety. 2 music festivals have already been cancelled due to bushfires, as Tim Skelton reports.
For many, music festivals are as much a part of a traditional Australian summer as the beach and the cricket, but extreme heat and the threat posed by bushfires are forcing organisers of some of the country's highest profile events to rethink their plans. Julia Robinson is the General Manager of the Australian Festivals Association, a group representing festival organisers.
I'm sure that discussions will be had at the end of what is looking like a very long summer season of these threats.
Earlier this month, organisers of the Lost Paradise Festival cancelled their event because of its proximity to the Gospers Mountain megafire northwest of Sydney. Then on Sunday, 9,000 revellers at the Falls Festival on Victoria's southwest coast were told to pack up their campsites and leave the area. In a statement, the festival's organisers said that after meeting with emergency services, it was clear they had no other option. Dr. David Caldecott is an emergency consultant and a senior lecturer in medicine at the Australian National University. He says the organisers made the right call.
The combination of the very elevated temperatures for this time of the year and the extreme bushfire risk make the proposition of people using drugs in remote areas and potentially playing with fire all the more dangerous. One of the biggest problems with the Australian festival season is the combination of drugs that create hyperthermia in a hyperthermic environment, so they can't lose heat. And overheating is a significant problem for young people in this environment.
Many events like Falls Festival at Lorne and Lost Paradise are located deep in bushland or national park. It's part of the attraction, but that creates real problems if a sudden evacuation is necessary. Julia Robinson says the cancellations show the industry is doing the right thing.
Seeing the decisions being made early and festival organisers heeding the advice from the authorities is a really positive sign that organisers are taking these matters of climate change and the bushfire risks really seriously.
Dr. David Caldecott says drug use only increases the potential for something to go wrong.
The combination of the toxicology and the impaired judgment, it might be something as simple as throwing away a lit cigarette and not knowing that you're doing so, all the way to not being able to identify the best way out of a venue that's actually on fire.
But for some harm minimisation experts, governments aren't doing enough to protect patrons from the risks associated with drug use at music festivals. The New South Wales government is opposed to pill testing, but has agreed to allow festivals to introduce amnesty bins where patrons can dispose of drugs they decide not to take. Now, Dr. David Caldecott says amnesty bins are not going to achieve much.
It's more unlikely, I feel, that young people will abandon drugs that they spend a considerable amount of money on just because they're afraid of getting caught.
Dr. David Caldecott from the Australian National University, ending Tim Skelton's report. That's PM for this Tuesday. I'm Ange Savoie-Pierre, and we'll be back at the same time tomorrow. We'll catch you then.
Unvasion with ABC News. New South Wales Police have warned that all communications will be lost tonight on the New South Wales south coast, where bushfires are devastating the region. Ursula Malone reports.
A power outage means that telecommunications will go down tonight across a vast swathe of the south coast, from Nowra down to Maruya. Internet connections, mobile phones and landlines will start to go down and will be lost overnight. Hospitals will be among the many facilities affected. Police say it's too dangerous to repair power lines in the area tonight, so the communication blackout will continue at least until tomorrow.
Earlier, the New South Wales Premier confirmed 2 people were killed when a bushfire tore through the town of Cobargo on the south coast. A woman discovered the bodies of her husband and son this morning. They had stayed to defend their property overnight. A 72-year-old man is also missing northwest of Cobargo. The Rural Fire Service says dozens of homes have been lost in the fires in the area. Gladys Berejiklian says the region is still at serious risk.
The next few hours are critical, with conditions not abating for a number of hours, and we ask everybody to please follow the advice, take advice, and where possible, stay in touch with loved ones and please account for them.
To Victoria now, where a bushfire emergency is also playing out tonight, and more than 20 blazes continue to burn across the state. 4 people remain missing in Victoria, and 43 homes and structures have been destroyed in East Gippsland. Emergency Management Commissioner Andrew Crisp says there's still a very real fire risk for many communities.
When we talk about East Gippsland and what's happened down there, earlier today we talked about significant losses that we were aware of, and we're still doing some work to better determine what those numbers look like. At this stage, we've been using a helicopter to fly over some of those communities.
Fire continues to surround the town of Corryong in northeast Victoria, where significant losses of property have also occurred, but authorities say the main fire front has passed the town. A number of blazes have also started in Victoria's Alpine region, caused by a band of lightning that crossed the state this afternoon. The ability to get fire trucks in and out of Corryong is also limited, and power and phone lines have been cut off. Luke Hegarty of the State Control Centre says people in the area should shelter indoors.
We know that this fire has earlier been resulting in ember attack across a number of communities today.
A resident of East Gippsland in Victoria says the fires have wiped out communities. Graham Clark lives at Can River and says locals can't travel on the roads, and he thinks dozens of homes have been lost.
There's trees of substantial size covering the roads. This fire swept through with just incredible intensity and burnt everything in its path. Even when there were some controlled burns, it just lit them up like paper.
Meanwhile, Sydney is pressing ahead with its world-famous New Year's fireworks display at midnight. Despite the fires, the city's Lord Mayor Clover Moore says Sydney has become the New Year's Eve capital and there was no value in cancelling them.
Hotels are booked, restaurants are booked, and it means a lot to the state's economy. It means a lot to the tourism industry, and it means a lot to small businesses that, have been suffering.
Also making news headlines today, homicide detectives are investigating after 3 people were shot, one fatally, at Yarraville in Melbourne's west this morning. A woman died after being attacked in Salisbury Street at about 10:30. The authorities in the Philippines say the number of people known to have been killed by Typhoon Panphon has risen to 50. That makes it the deadliest storm in the country this year. And former Nissan boss Carlos Ghosn has travelled to Lebanon after leaving Japan, where he faces a trial over has confirmed 2 people have been killed after a bushfire tore through the town of Cobargo on the New South Wales south coast. And more than 20 blazes are still burning across Victoria. 4 people remain missing in the bushfire crisis there. The national forecast for New Year's Eve: Brisbane partly cloudy tonight, 27 right now. Sydney smoke haze, 22. Canberra a possible shower this evening, 32. Melbourne clear tonight, 20. Hobart cloud clearing, 19. Adelaide clear and 22. Perth clear, 27, and Darwin a shower or 2, 32. That's ABC News.
There you go. And now you know. as it were foretold within the prophecy. And Australia voted to die. And as Australia burns, as the willy willies turn into fire tornadoes and pick up 8-ton fire trucks and literally invert them, killing people inside, our conservative Liberal national governments, they maintain the party line that there's no point in cancelling the fireworks display tonight because the tourism industry depends on it, and we've already spent the money on crowd control and clean-up. Australian bushfire politics versus science and reality. We, the ungoverned, are ungoverned because we democratically voted for a bunch of populist half-wits who just don't get it. While I, a pensioner living on an endangered species sanctuary, spend months trying to reduce my chances of being burnt alive, all the normal people have been planning their Christmas New Year's party. Woohoo! I have spent a year and a half upgrading my fire hose. And sprinkler. And water. And fire pump. Collection. Preparing to attempt not to be burnt out by dint of reducing the amount of bushfire fuel on the ground, trying to get it down, you know, from like 50 tonnes to the hectare to something like maybe 25 tonnes to the hectare, you know. Figures that were considered catastrophic 40 years ago, but which today would be a 100% improvement on the fuel burden that a dying forest has put on the ground since last time I was able to conduct a hazard reduction burn here. And it's not so long since I did it. The trees bear witness to the fires that I have put through here in my ongoing attempt to manage the forest in something a bit more like a traditional fashion. And while I've been doing things that seem pretty sensible, my Premier, Gladys Berejiklian, Liberal Party leader in Sydney, she was doing really inspired things to boost the economy of New South Wales, like she cut $148 million from the New South Wales firefighting budget in 2019 leading into this. She cut 176 jobs for New South Wales Parks and Wildlife Rangers, so there would be nobody employed in the national parks to try and do any hazard reduction burns during the ever-shrinking, tiny little reducing window of opportunity to try and do any reduction burns during winter in the second year of a record-breaking, unprecedented drought, which has been predicted for decades as a logical, legitimate consequence of global industrial scale fossil carbon emissions to the atmosphere. None of this should surprise anybody, because it sure as hell does not surprise me. Welcome to dumbocracy, where perfect liberty means perfect responsibility and absolute freedom means freedom to pick wrong. Gladys Berejiklian, she's done a lot of picking wrong in her time as leader of New South Wales, as has Tony Abbott, Scott Morrison, Barnaby Joyce, Peter Dutton, Matthias Cormann, John Barilaro, the entire conservative side of politics, the right-wing neoliberal neo-fascists, the people who want to deregulate everything in business and economics while telling everybody how to live their lives in everything else that matters. They chose to be wrong. Nobody held a gun at their heads. They chose to be wrong. They chose to lead the people astray. They chose to promise bread and circuses and endless economic growth. They chose to teach the people the fallacy that the economy matters more than the ecology. And now Australia is about to be invaded. Scott Morrison, who won the unwinnable election, made the cardinal mistake of having put himself in power at the time when everything goes to shit, and now he has to deal with it. Scott Morrison, Australia's Unvasion Day prime muppet. As it were foretold within the prophecy, if you doubt it, title search my videos. Go looking for, quote, Australia has voted to die. Watch the video and look really long and hard at the date of uploading. Warble's on a lot to YouTube. What do you think about it, Furball? Liberal National Labor Party. They're so silly they wouldn't know if the hole in their ass was punched or bored or cut with a cold chisel, would they, mate? Eh? They're not that fucking bright. No, they're not. Warble's on a lot to YouTube. Such is life. Ciao.